Single dad adopts two abandoned twin babies on Christmas Eve, but when he discovers who those babies really are, he's shocked. Comment giving a score from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The night was freezing cold on Christmas Eve, the most anticipated holiday of the year. The 30-year-old entrepreneur, owner of a rapidly growing tech company in the metropolitan area, parked his imported car in the garage of his luxurious home and walked towards the main entrance. His footsteps echoed in the silence of the empty street, and the fatigue from the last meetings weighed heavily on his shoulders. He was still wearing the impeccable suit he had worn all day, but his mind was already seeking the comfort of a quiet night. Alone, as always. As he approached the door, something unusual caught his attention. A large cardboard box, worn around the edges, sat on the front porch step. His heart skipped a beat, and his first reaction was one of alert. Could it be a forgotten delivery? But there was no label or identification. Cautiously, he crouched down and touched the rough surface of the box. That's when he heard the sound. A faint, muffled cry coming from inside. His hands trembled as he opened the cardboard flaps. There, wrapped in a worn and stained blanket, were two tiny babies, their cheeks flushed pink from the cold, their eyes still closed to the cruel world that had abandoned them. They were shivering, and the crying intensified as the icy night air touched their delicate skin. The entrepreneur was paralyzed, unable to process the scene before him. His eyes scanned the box for some explanation and found a note scribbled in shaky handwriting. "Please take care of them. I can't afford to." Without thinking, he picked up the box and carried the babies inside, slamming the door shut behind him. The warmth of the house enveloped the little ones immediately, but they continued to cry, hungry and scared. The entrepreneur had never held a baby in his life. His movements were clumsy, unsure, but there was something in his eyes that prevented him from calling the authorities. Perhaps it was the memory of his wife, who had passed away 3 years ago, leaving a void that he had never been able to fill. She had always wanted children. She had always talked about building a family. And now, here were two helpless beings, needing someone. He improvised a bed with pillows and soft blankets on the living room floor, warmed up milk he found in the pantry, and, with trembling hands, struggled to feed the babies. They accepted the food voraciously, and little by little the crying subsided into soft sighs. The entrepreneur watched them for hours, sitting on the floor beside them, unable to move. Something deep and inexplicable was happening inside him. A connection he didn't understand, but that bound him to those two little ones with irresistible force. In the following days, he made a decision that surprised everyone around him. He would adopt them. His 60-year-old secretary, who had worked with him for decades and knew every detail of his life, was stunned when he broke the news. She tried to argue, point out the challenges, question whether he was prepared for such a responsibility. But the entrepreneur had already decided. He hired lawyers, initiated the legal proceedings, and in a few weeks, the babies were officially under his temporary care, while the adoption process followed its bureaucratic course. Society around him whispered, how could a single, young, successful man with the looks of a matinee idol give up everything to care for two children who weren't even his? He heard the comments in the company hallways, noticed the judgmental looks in business meetings, but none of that mattered. For the first time in 3 years, he felt that there was a greater purpose in his life. The twins filled the silence that dominated the huge house, bringing movement and life to every empty room. The secretary, seeing his effort, offered to help. She started arriving earlier at the entrepreneur's house, taking care of the babies while he prepared for work. She fed them, changed diapers, and rocked them when they cried. There was genuine affection in her gestures, as if those little ones had also touched something dormant in her soul. The entrepreneur, in turn, learned little by little. His nights were short, interrupted by cries and constant needs, but he didn't complain. Every toothless smile, every clumsy gesture of the babies warmed his heart in ways he had never imagined possible. 2 months passed. The twins grew healthy, but something peculiar began to catch the entrepreneur's attention. Whenever he carried one of the babies around the room, the little one would fix his gaze on a framed photograph of his deceased wife, which remained on the mantelpiece. And it wasn't just any look. It was a smile, spontaneous and pure, as if he recognized someone dear. The other baby, on the other hand, only calmed down completely when wrapped in a wool shawl that had belonged to his wife, a fabric worn by time but imbued with the soft perfume she used to wear. The entrepreneur tried to ignore these coincidences at first, attributing everything to his tired imagination. But the repetition of the gestures was undeniable. He began to feel restless, questioning the origin of the twins. Who had left them there? Why exactly on his doorstep? Was there some connection he didn't know about? The questions hammered his mind during sleepless nights as he watched the babies sleep peacefully in their improvised cribs. He decided to investigate discreetly. He contacted the social worker responsible for the case and requested any available information about the babies, but the response was frustrating. There were no records, no clues about the biological mother, no medical history, nothing but the scribbled note he had found in the box. The social worker suggested that he move forward with the adoption and leave the past behind, but the entrepreneur couldn't. There was something bigger there, something he needed to understand. Meanwhile, the company was facing an unexpected crisis. One of the main investors, responsible for a large part of the capital that kept the company stable, abruptly withdrew his support. The stated reason was vague, but rumors began to circulate. They said that the entrepreneur's reputation was being tarnished, that he was losing focus on business, that taking care of 2 babies alone was a sign of emotional instability. The closest competitor, an ambitious man who had always wanted to take control of the local market, skillfully spread these stories, poisoning business relationships that had taken years to build. The company's finances began to tighten. The entrepreneur was forced to make painful decisions. He sold one of the imported cars, put up for sale an apartment he had as an investment, and cut superfluous expenses. The secretary, realizing his suffering, offered to lend part of her savings, but he firmly refused. He would not allow her to sacrifice her resources because of him. He would find a solution, no matter the cost. It was during this period of anguish that the woman appeared for the first time. The entrepreneur was in the park near his house, pushing the twins' double stroller under the weak afternoon sun, when he noticed a female figure watching from a distance. She was about 30 years old, with dark hair tied back in a messy way, simple clothes, and an intense expression on her face. He didn't pay much attention at the time, but in the following days, the same woman reappeared, always at a distance, always watching. Paranoia began to take over him. Was it just a coincidence, or was there something more sinister going on? The entrepreneur began to look over his shoulder constantly, check if he was being followed, lock the doors of the house more carefully. The secretary noticed the change in his behavior and questioned him, but he downplayed it, claiming it was just accumulated stress. Then, on a rainy afternoon, the woman appeared at the company's front door. She demanded to speak to him, and the receptionist, confused, called the entrepreneur's office. He came down immediately, his heart pounding. When he saw her up close, something in her eyes disturbed him deeply. There was despair there, but also determination. She didn't waste time with formalities. She looked directly at him and said the words that shattered his world. "I am the baby's mother, and I've come to take them back." The entrepreneur felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. The woman's words echoed in his mind like an endless nightmare. He tried to maintain his composure, but his voice came out shaky when he replied that they needed to talk calmly in a more private place. She agreed with a dry nod, and he led her to an empty conference room on the second floor of the company. The silence during the ascent was suffocating, heavy with tension and fear. Sitting face to face, separated only by a polished wooden table, the woman began to speak. Her name didn't matter, she said, only the fact that the babies were hers and she had come to claim them. The entrepreneur felt anger rise in his throat, but he restrained himself. He asked why she had abandoned them if she now wanted them back. The answer came accompanied by tears that streamed down her face without shame. She had no choice, she claimed. She was alone, without resources, without family. She thought that giving them to someone capable would be the best for them. But things had changed, she continued. She had gotten a steady job, rented a small apartment in a distant neighborhood, and now had the minimum conditions to raise them. The entrepreneur listened to everything with a heavy heart. Each word was a stab at his heart because he knew that legally she might have rights over the twins. The adoption was not yet finalized. The papers were still going through the bureaucracy of the system, and the appearance of the biological mother complicated everything in unimaginable ways. He tried to negotiate. He offered financial support, proposed that she could visit them regularly, build a relationship little by little. But the woman was inflexible. She wanted the babies back immediately. She threatened to seek a lawyer, file a lawsuit, do whatever it took. The entrepreneur asked for time, a few days to process everything, but she was already getting up from her chair, making it clear that she wouldn't wait long. When the woman left, the entrepreneur collapsed into his chair, his hands covering his face. How could he lose the twins now? They were already part of his life, his routine, his heart. The secretary entered the room minutes later and found him like that, broken. He told her everything, and she listened in silence, her expression grave. After a few moments, she suggested that they hire a specialized lawyer immediately. They couldn't let the situation get out of control. The lawyer was clear and direct. The biological mother did have legal rights, especially since the adoption was not complete. If she presented documents proving motherhood and claimed regret, the case could drag on for months, maybe years. The entrepreneur felt the world collapse again. He invested all the remaining savings in legal fees, determined to fight to the end. The following days were torturous. He could barely sleep, spending the nights watching the twins, memorizing every detail of their little faces, fearing that at any moment someone would knock on the door and take them away. The secretary took on more responsibilities at the company, covering his absences, trying to keep everything running while he faced the most important battle of his life. It was then that the woman reappeared, this time accompanied. A disheveled-looking man, about 40 years old, with stubble and rumpled clothes, was by her side. He introduced himself as the baby's father, and his posture was aggressive, intimidating. The entrepreneur received them in the living room of his house, refusing to show weakness, although inside he was shattered. The man got straight to the point. He wanted money, an absurd amount he specified in exchange for disappearing permanently. He would sign any paper renouncing rights to the twins, but only upon payment. The entrepreneur looked at the woman, seeking some sign that this was a mistake, but she looked away, ashamed. The situation had become blatant blackmail. He asked them to leave his house immediately. He would not negotiate under threat. The man laughed, a rough and unpleasant sound, and said that they would be back, and next time it would be with lawyers and court orders. The woman followed the man in silence, but before leaving, she cast one last look at the babies, who were sleeping peacefully in the nearby crib. There was something in that look, a mixture of pain and regret, that the entrepreneur could not decipher. After the couple left, he panicked. He called the lawyer in the middle of the night, reported what had happened, and was advised not to give in to extortion in any way. But he was also warned. The case was becoming complex, and there were real risks of losing temporary custody of the twins if the woman insisted judicially. The secretary, realizing the entrepreneur's growing despair, decided to take action. She had contacts in various places, built over decades of work, and began to make calls, seeking information about that man who claimed to be the baby's father. Something about him didn't seem right. The way he spoke, the aggressive behavior, the demand for immediate payment, everything seemed too calculated. It took 3 days of discreet investigation. The secretary spoke with acquaintances in different neighborhoods of the metropolitan area, asked cautious questions, followed vague leads, until she found something. An elderly woman who worked at a community center recognized the man's description. He had a history of scams. He had done this before, in another city, pretending to be the father of adopted children to extort emotionally vulnerable families. The secretary took the information to the entrepreneur, along with some names of people who could confirm the story. He felt a mixture of relief and anger. Relief because there was a chance to expose the scammer, but anger for knowing that the woman was being used in such a cruel scheme. He hired a private investigator, a discreet professional recommended by the lawyer, to gather concrete evidence. The detective worked fast. In less than a week, he had a complete dossier. The man had records of previous lawsuits in 3 different cities, all involving extortion related to adoptions. There was even an outstanding arrest warrant in another state for a similar case that had resulted in formal charges. The evidence was solid, irrefutable. The entrepreneur scheduled a meeting with the woman without the man present. He needed to talk to her alone, show her the truth before it was too late. She agreed to meet him at a discreet coffee shop downtown. When she arrived, she seemed smaller, more fragile than before. There was fear in her eyes. He placed the dossier on the table, opened it to the first page, and pushed it towards her. He asked her to read it carefully. The woman picked up the papers with trembling hands, and as her eyes ran across the lines, her face grew progressively paler. The evidence was clear. The man claiming to be the baby's father was a professional scammer, and she had been manipulated from the start. Tears began to fall, wetting the documents. The woman broke down, covering her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with uncontrollable sobs. The entrepreneur felt compassion, despite all the pain she had caused him. He waited for her to calm down, offered her a paper napkin, and when she finally managed to speak, the truth began to come out in fragmented gasps. She confessed that she had met the man a few weeks before abandoning the babies. He had appeared offering help, saying that he knew someone who could adopt the children and still pay her a sum to start her life over. It seemed like a perfect solution. But after she left the twins on that doorstep, the man changed completely. He began to pressure her, saying that she needed to get the children back, that they could make a lot of money from it. She tried to refuse, but he threatened her, said that he would report her for abandonment if she didn't cooperate. The entrepreneur listened to everything in silence, processing each word. The situation was even worse than he had imagined. The woman wasn't a villain, but a victim being used in an elaborate plan to extort his fortune and investments accumulated over the years. He asked if she really wanted the babies back, or if she was just following the scammer's orders. The answer came with more tears. She didn't have the conditions, neither emotional nor financial, to raise 2 children. She never had. The entrepreneur watched the woman crumble before him and felt that he needed to act with caution. He couldn't simply push her away without offering some solution, but he also couldn't allow the scammer to continue manipulating the situation. He took a deep breath and made a proposal. If she agreed to sign the adoption papers definitively, renouncing any rights to the twins, he would help her get out of that dangerous situation. He could find a safe place for her to stay, away from the man who was threatening her, and even help her get a decent job. The woman raised her eyes, red and swollen, and for the first time seemed to see a light at the end of the tunnel. She agreed, but admitted to being afraid. The scammer knew where she lived, knew her movements, and wouldn't easily give up on a target that promised so much profit. The entrepreneur guaranteed that he would provide protection. He called the lawyer immediately, reported the new developments, and together they devised a plan to confront the criminal with the evidence gathered by the detective. 2 days later, the scammer appeared again at the entrepreneur's doorstep, this time alone. He came confidently, thinking that the constant pressure would eventually break the target's resistance. But when the door opened, it wasn't the entrepreneur who greeted him. It was the lawyer, accompanied by 2 bailiffs. The man tried to back away, but it was too late. The evidence was presented right there at the entrance to the residence, and he was informed that there was an outstanding arrest warrant against him in another state. The expression of confidence instantly disappeared from the scammer's face. He tried to argue, deny, but the documents were irrefutable. The officers took him into custody, and the entrepreneur watched everything from the living room window, with the twins in his arms. He felt immense relief, but knew that this was just the beginning of the resolution. There was still much to be resolved. The woman kept her part of the agreement. With assistance from the entrepreneur's lawyer, she signed all the necessary papers, formally renouncing any rights to the babies. During the signing, her hands trembled, and silent tears streamed down her face. The entrepreneur realized that this wasn't easy for her, but it was the right decision. She didn't have the structure to take care of 2 children, and forcing her to take on this responsibility would be harmful to everyone involved. Before leaving for the temporary shelter that the entrepreneur had provided, the woman asked to see the twins one last time. He agreed and led her to the room where they were sleeping peacefully, wrapped in soft blankets. She stood at the door for long minutes, just watching, memorizing every detail. Then she turned and left without saying a word. The entrepreneur accompanied her to the door, and as she was about to leave, she whispered an almost inaudible thank you. She thanked him for giving the babies the home she could never offer. With the legal threat resolved, the adoption process moved forward quickly. The social worker responsible for the case made regular visits, assessed the conditions of the house, observed the entrepreneur's interaction with the twins, and her report was extremely positive. In 3 months, the adoption was official. The entrepreneur was now legally and definitively the father of the 2 babies. The secretary celebrated the news with tears of happiness. She had followed every step of that agonizing journey, and seeing the positive outcome filled her heart with joy. But during the discreet celebrations, she revealed something she had been holding back for some time. She said that she needed to tell a story that might explain some of the coincidences that so intrigued the entrepreneur. She began by reporting that many years ago, even before working for him, she had volunteered in a social project aimed at mothers in vulnerable situations. It was a job she did on weekends, offering support and guidance to women facing extreme difficulties. And it was in this project that she met the entrepreneur's wife, long before he himself met her. The entrepreneur was stunned. He had never known this detail of his deceased wife's life. The secretary continued, explaining that the woman was one of the most dedicated volunteers in the project, always available to help, always affectionate with everyone who sought assistance. And among these women, years ago, there was a scared teenager who briefly attended the project, a young woman who had abandoned the follow-up after a few weeks, but had left a lasting impression on the entrepreneur's wife. The teenager was the twins' biological mother. The secretary was sure. She had recognized the woman as soon as she saw her for the first time at the company, although the years had changed her face a lot. The entrepreneur's wife had been one of the few people who really cared about that lost girl, offering words of encouragement and even some material support. But the young woman had disappeared from the project before any real change could happen in her life. The entrepreneur felt a chill run down his spine. The connections were too deep to be mere coincidence. The babies he had found abandoned on his doorstep had a connection with his deceased wife through the biological mother. It was as if the invisible threads of destiny had woven a complex web, uniting lives that seemed separate but that had always been intertwined in some way. He spent days reflecting on this revelation. He remembered how the twins reacted to the photograph of his wife, how they calmed down with her shawl. Perhaps there was something bigger at stake, something he couldn't fully understand, but that made sense on a deeper level. His wife had always talked about signs, about how the universe had mysterious ways of guiding people to where they needed to be. While processing these reflections, the company began to show signs of recovery. The competitor who had spread malicious rumors about him lost credibility when the news of the successful adoption spread through the business community. Many saw his attitude as an act of courage and compassion, and this strengthened his reputation instead of harming it. A former business partner who had distanced himself years before due to disagreements about the direction of the company contacted him. He said he had followed the whole situation from afar and had been impressed with how the entrepreneur had maintained his integrity during the crisis. He offered a significant investment, enough to not only stabilize finances, but also allow the expansion that had been planned before everything collapsed. The entrepreneur accepted the proposal, and the contracts were signed in a matter of weeks. The company returned to growth, employees regained confidence, and the projects that were shelved were back on the table. The secretary took on a position of greater responsibility, becoming practically an unofficial partner, managing operations while he divided his time between business and fatherhood. The twins grew quickly. At 8 months old, they already showed distinct personalities. One was calmer, more observant, spending hours playing alone with colorful blocks. The other was restless, curious, always trying to reach objects out of his reach, crying when frustrated. The entrepreneur had learned to recognize each cry, each gesture, each specific need of each one. The nights were still tiring, but he didn't care. Every moment with the twins was worth every hour of lost sleep. He took them to the park on weekends, pushing the double stroller while watching other families around. He no longer felt alone. He had a family now, built unexpectedly, but no less real for that. The secretary often stayed late at his house, helping with the babies, preparing food, organizing the routine. She had become a maternal figure for the twins, and they responded to her with smiles and gestures of affection. There was a strange but comforting harmony in that unconventional family setting. During a quiet afternoon, while organizing some old belongings of his wife that were still stored in boxes in the closet, the entrepreneur found something that took his breath away. It was a letter, handwritten, with the delicate handwriting that he would recognize anywhere. The date at the top indicated that it had been written a few months before she passed. His hands trembled as he unfolded the yellowed paper. The letter trembled between the entrepreneur's fingers as he read the first lines. His wife's words seemed to jump off the paper, alive and present, as if she were there beside him, whispering in his ear. She began by saying that if something happened to her, there were important things that she needed to leave on record. His heart raced, and he sat down on the closet floor, unable to stand. The letter spoke of regrets. She deeply regretted that they had not been able to start a family while there was still time. She wrote about how she had always dreamed of adopting children, especially those who had no one in the world, because she believed that love did not need blood ties to be true and transformative. She said that she knew how generous her husband possessed a heart, even if he himself did not recognize it, and that she was sure that he would be an extraordinary father if he had the chance. Tears began to blur the entrepreneur's vision, but he continued reading. His wife wrote that if she left before they realized this dream together, she hoped he wouldn't give up on living fully. She asked him to consider opening his heart to children who needed a home because she knew he had so much love to give, enough love to fill the empty days and turn pain into something beautiful and meaningful. The letter ended with a sentence that destroyed him completely. Don't let loneliness win you. Wherever I am, I will be rooting for you to find a way to be happy again, even if it's in a different way than we planned together. He let the letter fall into his lap and covered his face with his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. All the weight of the last months collapsed on him at that moment. The pain of loss, the fear of failing with the twins, the accumulated exhaustion, all came to the surface at once. But along with the pain, there was also a strange sense of peace. It was as if his wife had left that message knowing that he would need it at the right moment. The secretary heard the crying from downstairs and ran up, worried. She found him sitting on the floor, surrounded by old boxes, holding the letter with reverence. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She sat down next to him on the floor and simply stayed there, offering her silent presence as comfort. After long minutes, he showed her the letter, and she read it in silence, her own tears streaming down her wrinkled face. When she finished reading, the secretary took his hand and said something he would never forget. She said that his wife was right about him, that she had always been able to see the potential for goodness that he carried, even when the business world tried to harden his heart, and that the twins didn't come to him by chance. They were the gift that his wife couldn't give in life, but that the universe, in some mysterious way, conspired to deliver. The following days were of profound transformation. The entrepreneur began to see the whole journey in a new perspective. The difficulties, the threats, the moments of despair, all were part of a path that led him to that point. He was no longer the same man who had found 2 abandoned babies months ago. He was someone who had learned to put love above all else, to sacrifice comfort in the name of responsibility, to fight for something bigger than his own interests. The company continued to prosper. The new investment allowed the hiring of competent professionals who relieved part of the workload, giving him more time to be with the twins. He established a balanced routine, coming home earlier, actively participating in each phase of the children's development. He taught them simple words, played on the living room floor, read stories before bed, even though they were still too young to understand completely. The secretary remained present, but now as a loving grandmother rather than just a helpful employee. She brought new toys, prepared special recipes, and sang old songs that calmed the twins when they were restless. The house, which had once been silent and empty, now exuded life in every room. 6 months after the adoption was finalized, the entrepreneur received an unexpected letter. It was from the twins' biological mother. She was writing from the shelter where she was staying, a safe place that the entrepreneur had helped provide. The letter was short but sincere. She thanked him for everything he had done, not only for the babies but for her as well. She said she was undergoing psychological counseling, working at a local market, and trying to rebuild her life in a dignified way. She wrote that she thought about the twins every day, but knew she had made the right decision in leaving them with him. She asked for only one thing, that when they grew up and were old enough to understand, he would tell them the truth about their origin. She didn't want them to grow up thinking they were rejected, but rather that they were loved in a different way, through the sacrifice of a mother who recognized her limitations and chose to give them something better. The entrepreneur kept the letter carefully. One day, when the twins were older, he would tell them everything. He would tell them about the cold night he found them, about the woman who brought them to him, about his wife's letter that seemed to foresee everything. He would tell them about love, about difficult choices, about how families can be formed in unexpected and no less true ways. The metropolitan area where they lived began to recognize him not only as a successful entrepreneur, but as an example of dedicated fatherhood. He was invited to speak at events about adoption, about breaking stigmas, about how single men can also raise children with love and competence. Initially reluctant, he accepted some invitations, hoping that his story could inspire others to open their hearts. During one of these talks, an elderly woman in the audience approached him at the end and said that she had gone through something similar decades ago. She had adopted a child alone when society was even more conservative, faced cruel judgments, but never regretted it. She said that seeing someone doing the same decades later proved that the world was changing, slowly, but changing. The entrepreneur hugged the woman, moved, feeling a deep connection with all those who chose love above conventions. The twins turned 1 year old. The entrepreneur organized a small party at home, inviting only close people. The secretary prepared a cake decorated with care, and they sang "Happy Birthday," while the babies clapped clumsily, not fully understanding what was happening, but happy with all the attention and joy around them. As he watched the twins play with the simple gifts, sitting on the living room rug, surrounded by crumpled wrapping paper, the entrepreneur felt immense gratitude fill his chest. He looked at his wife's portrait on the wall and whispered a silent thank you. She was right. He had so much love to give, and those two little beings had received every drop of that love, transforming his existence from empty to abundant. The secretary approached, holding a cup of coffee, and stood beside him watching the scene. She commented in a soft voice that she had never seen someone change so much in so little time. The entrepreneur smiled, admitting that he didn't recognize himself anymore either. The person he was before he found the twins seemed like a distant stranger. Now, every decision he made took into account those two lives that depended completely on him. The following months brought stability and routine. The company consolidated its position in the market, competitors gave up trying to harm him, and new contracts arrived regularly. He even managed to increase the salaries of his employees, knowing that much of that success was due to the hard work of each one during the difficult times. At home, the twins developed new skills every week. One of them took his first wobbly steps holding onto the edge of the couch, while the other preferred to crawl quickly everywhere, exploring every corner of the house. Their personalities became more defined, and the entrepreneur loved discovering who they were, respecting the differences between them. One afternoon, while playing with the twins in the backyard, under the shade of a leafy tree that swayed gently in the breeze, the entrepreneur had an epiphany. Everything he had been through, every pain, every fear, every moment of despair had been worth it. Because there, in that perfect and simple moment, he had everything that really mattered. It wasn't the wealth accumulated over the years, nor the business success, nor the social recognition. It was that. 2 babies laughing while he made them fly through the air, the sun warming his skin, the certainty that he was loved and needed. Life would never be perfect. There would be other challenges ahead, other difficulties to overcome. But now he was no longer alone to face them. He had a family, built unconventionally, but real in every aspect that mattered. And he had the memory of his wife, no longer as an open wound, but as a sweet memory that had guided him to that moment of fullness. When the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, the entrepreneur carried the 2 twins into the house, one in each arm. They were tired from playing, their heavy eyes fighting sleep. He placed them in their cribs, covered them with soft blankets, and watched as they fell asleep peacefully. He kissed each one's forehead, whispering words of love that they didn't yet understand, but would one day comprehend. And then, finally at peace with himself and with the path that life had drawn for him, he left the room, leaving the door ajar, ready to start all over again the next day. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.